we're excited to announce the Following the Fire podcast book club. We are going to be reading a new book every month, and we want you to read along with us. Then we're going to have a discussion. We're hoping to get some guests in so we can talk about some of our favorite books or maybe some of your favorite books. So which one are we doing this week, Steve?
We're going to do With by Skye Jitani.
It's a short title, so I'm going to repeat it.
Yeah.
That's With, W-I-T-H, that's the end, by Skye, spelled like the sky with an E at the end, Jitani, spelled like Jithani. So
exactly. With a J.
With a J.
And to make it easy on you guys, we'll stick a link to the book in the show notes and on the website at followingthefire.com.
Yeah, so we are hoping to do these, well, so we'll see what happens, but the kind of the beginning or the end of each month. So we are going to do this on April 7th. So get yourself a copy of With and read along. Send us some of your comments. Tell us what you thought. Maybe send us a question you'd like us to answer, or send us a book suggestion. And the month after that, maybe we'll read your book. Can't wait to see you there.
And I have been searching for what most people say just can't be found, but you always find me out.
Welcome to Following the Fire. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the wilderness. Just like Israel followed the pillar of fire and smoke, we want to take a new look at our beliefs and just follow him.
And like Israel, we get it wrong a lot, we get lost a lot, but we're doing our best to go where God leads us. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
Can't compare with what you're worth. I had been fighting.
In this episode, Nathan's going to share with us how misunderstanding good guys versus bad guys can lead to a gospel of moral superiority, and even this idea of us against them. And along the way, Nathan realizes that he wasn't the Jedi he thought, he was the Sith the whole time.
All these messages I thought you wanted to hear, but it only takes a whisper.
Hey, you're like living with the person now, right?
I'm living with the person now. Yeah. Just
Is that weird?
She's unpacking things. We have 2 of everything. So it's the beginning of integration of our stuff. And we skipped like wedding shower altogether, kind of on accident.
Yeah.
But we're also not 19, so we already have what you need to do life.
You got a toaster already?
I have a toaster, I have a blender, I have a slow cooker.
Well, Instapot.
I don't have an Instapot.
There you go.
I'm behind. I don't have what else? We are being given a stand mixer, which is, of course, that's how you know you're married, because if single dads don't need stand mixers.
That's true.
That's for serious cooking business.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So but we can't pick the color. We're having trouble picking the color. So once we pick the color, my grandma is gonna buy me one. So
that's cool.
But anyways, it's kind of nice though. I mean, it's too bad we missed out on all the celebration and the loot from wedding showers. But also, we have so much stuff already that we don't really need.
Yeah,
we need less, not more. But it's great. So I'm wondering, Steve, if you had growing up, or maybe you have now, a show that you liked, or a comic book or something that was about good versus evil.
Oh, like what wasn't?
It's what every story that I cared about is about.
I mean, the biggest one that comes to mind, that's still a favorite of mine, is Star Wars.
Star Wars. I was wondering if you were gonna.
Right?
Were you a kid that you liked it as a kid? You were a fan as a kid.
Oh yeah. First movie I ever went to in my life that I remember anyway.
Wow.
Was Empire Strikes Back, and
is that the middle one?
Episode 5, but really 2, because
Yeah.
we don't speak of the other ones.
We do not.
And I remember very vividly. I remember it was it's a theater that's closed down now over Campus West area, and I climbed in my mom's lap because I was so afraid that they were going to put C-3PO back together again. Like when he gets blown apart and he's like in the backpack, Chewbacca's backpack.
Yeah.
I was so afraid that they weren't going to get C-3PO back together again. I climbed up on my mom's lap and I turned away from the screen at that time. I don't remember. That's all I remember from the whole movie. But
yeah, that's funny. And there's like my brother watched Star Wars and somehow he ended up identifying with the dark side. Like, and there's some
I
kids
can see
like,
that.
Some kids they watch those movies and they want to be Darth Vader. Were you someone? Did you watch and you were like, I'm a Jedi for sure, or at least in the Resistance?
Yeah, I was definitely a Jedi.
Yeah. For me, I watched Star Wars, but kind of late, but definitely was a Jedi. Darkwing Duck was really big for me.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
And I was allowed to watch that because he uses non-lethal forms of violence. He's just gassing people.
Yeah.
Which, it's probably a war crime, but it was better than the Ninja Turtles, who had attitudes and used violence. So.
Oh.
Darkwing Duck. And then I... somehow this movie called The Rescuers Down Under. I have no idea if it's you've heard of it or seen it. I think I internalized that movie, which is about a little boy in Australia and some animals who are fighting an evil large truck driving poacher. And I for at least 5 years growing up, when I played as a kid, I was the poacher police. And my stuffed animals assisted me, and we fought the poachers. And that was our that was like everything that I did growing up.
Really?
Which I think is funny now, because the poachers just represented everything that was wrong. But I think it's funny that it's like, like hunting out of season and illegal trapping of game for financial.
It's the worst thing you can think of.
Yeah, that's as low as it gets. But I learned through those things 3 main things for how you can know if someone is a bad guy. So,
okay,
the most obvious one, of course, although this doesn't apply to Darth Vader, is if they smoke cigarettes.
Oh.
So all if you don't know anything, and then it's the person smoking the cigarette is the bad guy for sure.
Oh yeah.
So then the next thing to look for is just if someone is ugly. That's a dead giveaway.
Yeah.
The ugliness in their heart has come to the outside.
Yep.
And they're ugly now. So that's just you can know. And man, that poacher was hideous. And he had a hideous, ugly lizard sidekick. And I'm pretty sure he smoked. And then the final, if you just like really want to go the next level evil, you add a foreign accent.
Oh, preferably like Russian or German.
Russian or German, extremely evil. But any foreign accent is like you're in.
Or if they're like really devious evil, it's British.
The worst is British. So if you turn the corner and you're in a dark alleyway and Mr. Bean is smoking a cigarette.
It's good.
You have found evil incarnate. So yeah, I wanted to talk about this idea that I've been mulling over that has to do with how I learned concepts of good and evil and how I've applied them in my life in weird,
interesting,
upside down, broken ways.
Okay.
And you got to kind of follow me. It's it's a medium long journey from where I start, but it's going somewhere. So it starts with Sunday school and being a kid, being raised in the Church of Christ, but this could have happened in, I'm sure, lots and lots of different kinds of churches, Sunday school. And it starts with very good and well-meaning Sunday school teachers. And our tradition, and I think a lot of others, what we do to the stories we use to teach kids tend to come from the Old Testament.
A lot, yeah.
A lot of them. Definitely not all of them. You'll do the one where Jesus was a kid lost in the temple.
Yeah.
And Zacchaeus is a good one. Several stories from Jesus.
Well, Old Testament stories have a lot better plot.
Oh, they're way more fun than Jesus stories. Yeah. There's a short guy who gets to go eat dinner with a rabbi. The only cool thing about that story is that he climbs a sycamore tree.
Right.
And climbing trees is fun. But there's...
hey, you get the book of Judges. I mean, come on.
Oh, there's cutting hair and blindness and super strength.
And the guy is so fat that they stab him and like the sword gets all the way inside, like it closes in his belly.
Exactly. All the way in. There are lots of animals. There's a guy who talks to a donkey, so you teach that to kids because of animals. There's Noah and the destruction of a lot of mankind and the animals.
Right.
So there's
death and destruction.
Yeah, Adam and Eve and animals. Any story with animals. But what people are trying to do is is a well-meaning thing. It starts out, hey, let's teach kids about the Bible. That's a good thing.
Sure.
But when you're a kid, you can't dive into the depths of the Old Testament with your Sunday school teacher and look at the nuances and what's going on. So a lot of times what you learn is just the story. And there's this way that it gets taught that on accident, because we're kind of simplifying things and erasing a couple of weird or confusing or even maybe just not PG rated things in the stories. Mm-hmm. So you end up with kind of a caricature of what's really happening. So Noah and the flood, Abraham, David and Goliath, maybe. What else? Lots of these stories that are going to sound pretty familiar to people who grew up in a church of some kind, going to Sunday school. And so that's all good stuff. But a lot of times we read the story and there's a hero like Noah, and then a villain like the rest of the people. Or David is the hero and Goliath is the villain, or even Abraham and maybe Lot is the bad guy. And so instead of doing this thing that would be impossible with kids, which is like, hey, what is this story trying to say about us? Or, why did they make this decision? Why is God telling us a story? Often it turns into, here's a good behavior or a good trait to emulate from that story. So maybe Daniel was brave and standing up in a time that it was hard to stand up. So Daniel's a good guy. Let's be like Daniel in that story. Or who's the Egyptian? Joseph and was decent and upstanding and moral and ran away from Potiphar's wife, even though it cost him his job.
Right.
And so there's this thing that ends up happening on accident when you teach a lot of Old Testament and some New Testament stories of here's the good guy in the story. Sometimes there's a villain, and then good guys do this, or maybe the villain did this. And when as kids, that's probably as deep as you can go.
Yeah.
But I started to soak that in, and on accident learn some lessons about what does it mean to be maybe Israel and the chosen people of God that might have been wrong, and then a couple of things about what is a good guy and what is a bad guy, and it bleeds into the New Testament for sure. So we take some of those ideas. Abraham is the good guy, Lot is the bad guy, or even maybe it's the king that Abraham, he's passing through his territory. Maybe that's the bad guy. David's the good guy. Saul's the bad guy. And
Moses and Pharaoh.
Yeah. Moses and Pharaoh. And I always identified with the good guy in the story. Just like Darkwing Duck or the little kid in Rescuers Down Under, I always read myself in the hero role.
Yeah, as you would, right?
As the good guy. Yeah, I did that when I read Harry Potter. It's
unless you're Daniel, then you're Darth Vader.
Unless you're Daniel, or those people who read it and they're like, I'm going to be a Slytherin. So something's broken in those people that we can't fix. So we're not gonna, we can't help them. But I want to be the hero of my story, and when I read these, I start to see the world that way. And when I was in maybe first grade or kindergarten, I remember my idea of that there are good guys and bad guys was so well developed that there was a kid on my street. He was 16, so I thought he was an adult. He was in his teens. I don't know how old he actually was, but he was a kid. And I knew he wore bandanas like gangsters.
Yeah.
And he had been to some kind of juvenile prison.
Whoa.
So, bad dude. And he lived in between me and my friend's house. So I had to pass by his house every time I went to play with my friend. And I knew somehow, I don't know how I knew that, right? But I knew that this guy had been to prison. His name was Curtis. He smoked cigarettes sometimes.
Whoa.
So, I mean, he wasn't British, but it didn't matter. And I knew he was a bad guy. I would hold my breath when I crossed over, run super fast, or I was kind of scared of this house. I almost never saw Curtis, but I knew who he was. And then one day I crashed my bike right in front of his house. My face hit the curb. I was bleeding, and I was also like tangled up in my bike. Like only kids can do when you fall and you're like, your limbs, it feels like it's like a Looney Tunes where your tail gets sucked into the chain.
Yeah.
And Curtis came out as I was trapped, right? Couldn't move. And I was like, this is the end. But he came out with a rag and he got me untangled from the bike and he helped me with my bloody nose and he was kind and nice and he served me. And my little first grade brain just exploded because I had an idea of what a good guy is and what a bad guy is.
Right.
And Curtis ruined it for me. He was a bad guy that was doing this extremely good thing. And I was being loved in that moment. I was being served or helped or whatever by Curtis. And all of a sudden, my categories didn't make sense.
Yeah, which box does he go in now?
Yeah, he was, because again, it's the Disney trope or even the accidental Sunday school thing is Pharaoh is a bad guy. Moses is a good guy. And I had interpreted that as I'm a good guy, whatever that means as a first grader. And there are bad guys and you can identify them by some of, Curtis, if he swore or drank or smoked, or if he wasn't a Christian, or there's ways for me to figure out, are you with me or against me? And so I guess I expected him to be evil all the way down. But he might have been zero evil, because 16-year-olds who go to prison tend to have a lot of pain in their lives,
Yeah.
But it was a little bit of a glimpse into maybe that it's more complicated than I thought. And so revisiting as an adult some of those stories of the heroes, I realized many of what I thought of the heroes of the Old Testament are very flawed people. And all of the stories that I had heard, Noah is first of all, a very complex, and there's some darkness in the story of the flood.
Yeah.
But then he has a weird, shameful exit. The last story of Noah is his son finding him drunk and naked, which is maybe a weird euphemism that we don't really need to get into. And then his other sons covering his drunken nakedness. You know, and that's not a story about something we should emulate because the Old Testament recognizes that Noah is it's not presenting Noah as a hero, but I read it as presenting Noah as a hero. But it presents Noah as someone who is working through the complexity of a relationship with God. And it's just kind of weird that it ends that way. Abraham, with the weird stories with kings and him telling the kings that it's fine to marry his wife.
Yeah.
Totally weird. It's not behavior to emulate. It's not. There are things that, you know, are called out about Abraham that are righteous or that trusting or faithful, but the story of Abraham is a lot more complicated than that. David, clear example, but Isaac and Jacob, right? Isaac, the conniving, deceptive, kind of bratty. Wait, did I get that wrong? That's Jacob.
Jacob and Esau.
Jacob and Esau. Which one is the one that sleeps with the prostitute that's actually his daughter-in-law? Is that Isaac or Jacob? So when you
the Bible.
Yeah, when the Israelites said the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you know, you can read that as the God of the heroes of our faith, or like, man, the God of some messed up people who don't always get it right.
Yeah, because Jacob, I mean, I forget the prostitute thing, but he stole the birthright from his brother, and then lied to his blind, dying dad.
Right. I'm sad that I didn't look it up. I think it's Jacob, though, that he has a daughter-in-law. His son dies or something, so she's destitute. She's not being taken care of by the family anymore. She was maybe a foreigner or something, and she can't get him to take care of her as basically a widow. And so she dresses as a prostitute.
Oh.
Yeah, waits by the city gate.
Right.
And he's like, oh, there happens to be a prostitute. I'll give you my cord and my staff or whatever as a promise. And then she's like, caught you, you gross sicko. Now give me, like, take care of me now, right?
Huh.
So anyways, that's a obscure and... sorry to drag us to there, but the story of the Old Testament is so much more nuanced than I had been taught. And it's not saying the Israelites were amazing, everyone else was not, and so therefore God chose the Israelites as his people. It was more like God chose Israel. They didn't deserve it, though, and they kept not deserving it for their whole existence. So it's more of a story of God's putting up with them than a story of their excellence.
Yeah.
But the way that Israelites saw themselves was as special. Like, hey, we're the chosen people. That makes us awesome. And I had internalized and interpreted that also. So the new chosen people are the Christians. And me being a Christian means I'm on Team God.
Mm-hmm.
The people who do things like smoke are on Team Satan. And so I divided the world without anyone telling me that into good guys and bad guys, and I was on Team Good Guy.
So I totally can relate. Oh,
and you know, then determining, you know, I didn't question that I was Team Good Guy because I'm beautiful, I don't smoke, and have an American accent. So
right, and you go to church,
and I go to church Sunday morning and Sunday night because, you know,
and possibly Wednesday.
And Wednesday, I had some friends who only, you know, had time for God Sunday mornings, and then you know, heathen Sunday night, and I felt a little bit better than them. But as I brought that into the New Testament, I read myself into all of the best parts of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And in the New Testament, there are villains like Pharisees and Sadducees,
Herod
and Pilate, maybe some Christians in Paul's letters who are misbehaving somehow.
Sure.
And I didn't ever look at any of those things as like, I wonder if this applies to me. Because I saw myself so much as a good guy as opposed to out. And so then another story about how I internalized this so young, as a maybe first through fourth grader. There were 4 kids who lived on my block, and 2 of us were Christians, whatever that means when you're 8.
Right.
And 2 were not. One was an atheist and believed in evolution.
Whoa.
Yeah, so she was dumb. And then another one was just kind of a bad guy in making, getting into trouble, kind of mean, kind of a problem. So we didn't even know if he was a Christian or not. We just knew he was a bad guy, so clearly not a Christian. Yeah. So I remember as in those formative years, a neighborhood practice was the Christians would get together and have exclusive club meetings.
Really?
Specifically to exclude Megan, my atheist neighbor, and G.O.D, my sinner neighbor.
Whoa.
And we just felt like super righteous, and we called it the G.O.D club.
You did not.
Yeah, we called it the G.O.D club, and we actually did that to make fun of G.O.D. Because if you say G.O.D really fast, it kind of sounds like you're saying his name, but he wasn't allowed in the club. Oh. So this is the amount of meta layers of horrible wrongness that this is unending. That, and nobody taught us this. Nobody said, don't hang out with sinners, or you should exclude your neighbors because they're not Christians. But I learned good guys and bad guys. I'm a good guy, and you're against the bad guys. It's us versus them. And so my role in that I, if your mom, being my Sunday school teacher for a few years, if she had known I was doing this, would have been horrified.
Oh, absolutely.
This is not what we're intending, but it's how it's soaked in. And so I have guilt that is never going to go away, by the way, when I think about conversations I had with Megan or G.O.D. Right? But a sad thing is the view that they saw of 8-year-old Christian Nathan. It's not that far removed from how a lot of the non-believing world feels when they come in contact with Christianity on the news. Maybe the loudest Christian talking head on a cable show, or a sign, or a bumper sticker. And I am so convicted of those times as a kid, but I think I feel like it's a good exaggeration of the problem that I kind of internalized. So it kind of leads to associating being a Christian with moral behavior and a righteousness above other people, being better than people.
Yeah, or like a moral perfection almost. Like you said a few episodes ago that you need Jesus more than anybody else, right? I think a lot of us feel that way. But it's almost like when you're a kid, it's thinking this simplistic way. If you're a Christian, that means everything about what you're doing is fine and good.
Yeah, and there are things that we do maybe that we know the reason for it and it's right compared to someone else. And so instead of the natural response to meeting God is not, I'm so great.
Right.
Even in the Bible, the stories of people meeting God are, I'm terrified, I should not be here. And I think often that has to do with suddenly seeing yourself as what you are, which is not perfect by any means.
The rain is falling hard on this dusty ground. And I got no way of knowing what will grow. Is it love for me or resentment for the words that I spoke? But the sky is pouring down, so either way, we'll know.
I took a long time in Church of Christ terms to get baptized. I had been thinking about it since I was, kids maybe started 8 or 9, and then 13's a really big year for baptism at camp or something.
I was 13, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I was very conflicted, and I waited for what now is kind of silly. I was 16, but that's 3 years past some people's
dangerous.
Age of accountability. But I had a strong sense that I was not yet good enough to be a Christian, which is the opposite of the gospel.
Yeah.
So it's funny that I was baptized into an inverted gospel because I was waiting to be, I don't know enough or be right enough to then do it. The funny thing is, I can't remember my 0 through 16-year-old sin compared to my 16 through 35-year-old sin is not comparable. So I was pretty dang good on the on the spectrum, but I think it's telling that I didn't feel good enough and that I thought that was a thing that you needed to be in the club of Christianity.
So when you were little, you felt like you were fine and everything was great and you're good. And then you reached a point where you started, you kind of flipped?
Yeah, and it was probably around, church camp baptism age. So when my 13-year-old friends were being baptized, I was like, I knew what was wrong with me.
Yeah.
And it was that I had a temper, and it was not knowing very much about the Bible, not talking to my friends enough about the Bible. It was maybe what you would get on accident if you went to Sunday school and you learned, here's the things that you do if you're a Christian, kind of.
Well, and if, like you said, it makes sense to teach little kids, that just like the positive aspects of the story. You teach the Noah story up until he gets off the ark, and then next, Tower of Babel, they're bad people, and
Tower of Babel, yeah.
And it makes sense to do that when you're kids because, there's some pretty heavy themes, like you mentioned with Noah and the nakedness and stuff. But it can lead to definitely this feeling that you start reading those stories even when you get older. You start reading those stories, and then you read the part with Noah being great, and that would be me totally. And then when he does something bad, you're like, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Or we read all the stories about Israel screwing up, and we're like, that wouldn't have been me. I would have totally believed that was Jesus coming back. I wouldn't have been like Thomas,
Yeah. What I know about myself, though, is that I am a Pharisee, and I'm Zacchaeus pre-Jesus, not post-Jesus, or I'm more like Pharaoh than I am Moses, but I'm a lot like Moses in the times when he gets puffed up with pride or loses his temper or is leading people in one way but not acting in another way. Sometimes I'm more like the serpent than Adam or Eve.
Yeah.
But definitely in the New Testament, I think that as Christians we miss so much if we see something like a Pharisee as them, and we see what Jesus was doing as us, and on the surface it's like, hey, I don't get all uptight about the Sabbath. I'm a Jesus. But I certainly do the thing that they were doing, which is draw the lines around all the things that aren't as important as people, or just putting so much. I'm so much more like a Pharisee because I grew up as a Christian, so I'm earnestly seeking to do these things right. And the Pharisees I think, got it the most right of anyone in the Bible, except that they got each individual tree right, and the forest of mercy and justice and caring about people and loving people got lost in each, not smoking, not having a British accent, and not having a messed up face or something. I think it bleeds into Christianity as a whole in a few ways. One is, I think there's a fear in Christianity of morality outside of Christianity. So what I mean by that is, it's a two-edged sword. So I'll talk about the outside first. It's completely a true statement, in my opinion, that non-Christians can be moral people. And they can be wise, they can be loving, they can be kind. But I think that's almost a sacrilegious thing for a lot of Christians to accept, that, hey, do you know what? If a smart astrophysics, I can't even say it because I'm not one, can come up with this amazing thing, and or even have maybe a great idea on how to love your neighbor, or I've had atheist neighbors who are decent, kind, nice people. Mm-hmm. You can do it. You can get to nice from a lot of ways. And on the one side is it's a little scary to think about the outside non-Christians and accept good from that. Some in the news recently, for example, critical race theory is really controversial, and the Southern Baptist Convention came out against it.
Right.
And the reason they came out against it was it has atheist roots. It's
like somehow related to Marx.
Marx and some other atheists came up with the core ideas in critical theory. And so it's kind of like, how could anything good come from that, since it didn't come from this root of the inside in Christianity? It's by definition wrong. But I use light bulbs, and there are good things that I've gotten from non-Christian people, and it doesn't rock my boat or shake my foundation to admit that, because I'm not better than non-Christians. So that's the other side of the sword, is this feeling that, like, what is good about me is that I am a Christian. Like that puts me on a pedestal. And I think that's the most dangerous, when Christianity is your tribe. It's when it's your cultural identity, and it distinguishes you from from the people around you. But
yeah, I remember as a kid, the books. Honestly, now that I think of it, all the way through university, books and songs and anything having to in the religious sphere, it had to be a member of the Church of Christ. And I remember one of my preacher classes at college was like an introduction to preaching or something, or I forget exactly the terms, which class it was. But the professor got up in front of class the first day, and he's like, "Okay, you guys bought all the books for the class?" It was like 5 books or whatever. And he's like, "Just so you know, I want to get this out of the way ahead of time. Not all of these books are written by members of the church. Some of these, like this one guy, wrote this pastoral counseling book. He's a Baptist, and he explained all like the background of all these authors. And he's like, we just gotta eat the meat and spit out the bones." Like as though if they weren't a member of the church, quote unquote, there's definitely going to be bones in there. But
Right.
that was not said about the books that were written by members of the church. So that's kind of an extreme thing as far as like the distinctions between divisions within the larger group of Christ followers. But yeah, especially this idea that if something is invented by or developed by a non-Christian, then it's suspect immediately.
And there's a couple of dangers from that, which is, sure, we should be discerning when we look at something, I guess written by an outsider. Let's say that. But we should be equally discerning of the inside stuff.
Yeah.
Because it should almost be the opposite. It'd be easier to say, hey, C.S. Lewis is an Anglican, so some stuff is going to stick out to you, and so your radar is going to be up, and you're going to be testing and looking to make sure this is all good stuff, right? But if you are reading your tribe, your people you already agree with, then your radar is down. You are not you're not being discerning about, wait a minute, is this a true thing? Is this a good, noble thing? Is this person, getting something wrong?
Or do they have an ulterior motive?
Sure, yeah.
All kinds of stuff, yeah.
And I think and then a couple other really dangerous things that come out of that. One is, if we're Christians, so that makes us better than other people. So then if we discover darkness, there's an impulse to hide it. So that happens in me as an individual Christian. I know what my darkness is. I know that, I think all these people think I'm a Jedi, but I know I'm a Sith.
Yeah.
And I want to be on the good guy team, and the people around me all seem perfect. And so the impulse is, I'm going to do what I can to make it so that people can't see what I've got wrong with me.
Right.
The most dangerous is when that happens in Christian leaders, and we protect them, maybe. So
there's a lot of pressure there, yeah.
So, the Ravi Zacharias, did I say his name right? There was pressure to not let the world know this guy's moral failings because he was on the right team. He's a Jedi fighting for the right cause, and he's done a lot of good. And because we've inflated ourselves as beings morally superior, that means there's danger in people learning that we're not morally superior. And so we expend a lot of energy personally, just in our lives, hiding from other Christians. But even in its worst cases, protecting Christians who are hurting people from being found out, or all of that could be deflated if we just started from, Christian means that you need Jesus. It starts from, we're actually acknowledging that we're worse than other people, and that's part of who we are, and that the people that smoke may probably have something figured out that we don't. We have even less than that, so Jesus is filling up the gap for us. And it still would be hard. It's hard to share your failings, but
at a minimum, we're not better than other people.
Right. And even people who have been a Christian for a long time I think there's this feeling that we must be getting the moral stuff. If I'm a 10-year Christian, I forgot my 10-year badge, I'm that 10 times, 1 year's worth of being a Christian better than the heathens around me. But I don't personally think that's true. I think that the relationship with God can be getting better and better and better. But there's still a lot of that Sith darkness in us. And I think it's the more we admitted that with humility, I think the more the world would be open to us. But also, sure, we would be more open to relationship and conversation with people, with the Megans and the G.O.Ds of the world, who don't need to be told that they're not good, because they also feel it. I know, I am aware of my of the things that are wrong with me, and I'm sure I'm missing some too, but I'm very aware that I'm not as good as people. I'm not as tall or smart or strong or whatever, and other people are too. And the more that we, as Christians, make ourselves out to be even better, that's just distance from these people who like how can we be how can we be hanging out with Zacchaeus or with the Peters and Matthews of the world if they are getting, not only do we feel better, but people know when you feel superior to them.
Please don't turn away. Please don't hide your face. Would you remember the sunny days we shared? And all the laughter and joy before the rain.
And I think so the like good guys, bad guys, am I morally superior? That's a big thing. But then especially in this recent year, just the us against them. So if I'm a good guy and there are bad guys, and I learned my Sunday school lessons that you fight the bad guys, Pharaoh or Palestine, Goliath, then it's very much about it's me versus them. And you could read that into the Old Testament and be like, it was Jesus against the Pharisees, and we start to turn that into it has become a cultural thing where cultural Christianity is fighting against the influence of the world in elections or in there's countries where this happens in wars, but if you're an adult Christian, because this is something I struggle with every day, this bad versus good. But if you're an adult Christian and you have encountered the words of Jesus, you should be very, very careful about this us versus them stuff. Because Jesus came to a culture who very much identified themselves as the good guys. And he said things like, oh, you're the good guys? You're proud of yourself because you think you can keep making babies for God as the chosen people. But I tell you the truth, or Jesus' way of saying like, hey, I'm not joking here. God will make good guys out of rocks, all right? He's okay. He doesn't need you so that he can have lots of chosen people. It's not about you continuing to be Israelites and be special. It's not about that at all. And I just think at cultural Christianity we have adapted this idea that Christians are morally superior to the world and that we are now in a battle against the world.
Well, like speaking of politically, back in the 80s when the whole moral majority thing came to being. I mean, it just saying it's like we are moral,
right,
and we are the majority. And so therefore you have two reasons to listen to us. Not only are we, and they weren't the majority, and not only were they not the majority, they weren't all that moral either. I mean, because they're people. I mean, there's so many examples of this in the world. I mean, not just. I mean, coming from our sphere of just Christians in general, it's so frustrating when Christians put themselves out there as I am perfect because I'm a Christian. And of course, if you ask them, if you quiz them, they're like, oh no, I'm a sinner too, it's like Paul, chief of sinners. But they don't act like it. They act like they know better and that they are better, and if you don't do exactly what they do and live like they do, then something's immoral about you just by your existence.
Yeah. there's such a relief from if you've known. I've heard that these people referred to. It's kind of ironic as salt of the earth.
Yeah.
Like just in our society, I don't know if it's just my family that uses this, but salt of the earth. It's funny. It comes from the Bible, but it's more talking about like what does it mean?
So if someone says they're just the salt of the earth, I think of like they're a good old boy from down at the farm.
Yeah, they're a little bit simple, but they got a lot of character though. They're maybe feisty or they're all right. They're salt of the earth, and
average Joe type of thing.
But they're kind of like the people. So the way I've heard this used, I interpret it as the people who have their guards down. They're not trying to impress someone with how good they are, and so they'll accidentally misspeak, or they'll be like, you know what, I'm a little bit drunk right now, I apologize, or they're just open with who they are.
Right.
It's funny that it may just be that the way I've heard it, I've figured that must be what it means, but
yeah. They're not putting on airs.
They're not. They're adding flavor, not starch.
Salt.
Right. That was a weird mixed metaphor. Starch meaning what you do to clothing, but it's also a food.
I'm following.
You're following. Okay, so we are called to be the salt of the earth, not the starch of the vest. I don't know what you add starch to. So melt the ice. Is that a phrase? This is a triple mixed metaphor now, but the non-Christians and the Christians that I have been attracted to are the people who have their guard down. They are just authentic. And being authentic, it's not that they're good enough to let their guard down. It's that they let their guard down and they just didn't worry so much about how they're going to be perceived. And it's Peter. Peter was the brash. Peter was salt of the earth in that he did everything wholeheartedly. He got it wrong, but he wasn't so afraid of his reputation. He didn't have that thing to defend.
Yeah. Yeah, I taught a class at church a while back. I'm looking at my bookshelf trying to find the book. It's over there somewhere. Too many books. It's Unchristian. It's written by Gabe Lyons, I think, and I forget the other guy's name. I'll find it. Stick it in the show notes. But Unchristian, and it was Barna Group. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, the whole premise of it was the Barna Group did a lot of research with non-Christian people. The term they used was outsiders, just not evangelical or whatever. Christians in general, just not at all. And like they said, what are your views of people who are Christians? And what do you think about them? And they had some, criteria and things like that. And so many of them, like perceptions were, they're hypocritical. They hate gay people. They're too political. All these things. And so many of them came down to the fact that Christians, the perception was that Christians in general presented themselves as perfect and figured it out. They got it down. No matter what happens, they're going to go to heaven. You're not. Sorry about that. Bummer for you.
Yeah.
But anything that I do is somehow explained away or de facto correct because I'm a Christian. And that caused such consternation and anger and frustration with these people, understandably so, because they know they're not, that Christians are not perfect. But by presenting yourself as that I've got it all figured out, then, extreme examples, maybe not that extreme, just honestly, common example these days, is people say, I follow Christ. And then they watch how their actions about social justice or loving the outsider, all these things, how they watch people, how they act that way. And then these non-Christians go and look at the Bible and they see how Jesus acted. They're like, that doesn't match at all. And I just remember thinking when I read that book and I taught that class about how much of this could be like ameliorated and it would go away if Christians would just be more humble and honest about reality. I mean, I don't have to go around saying what all my specific sins are, but if I just come across as I don't have it figured out, like you're saying, I've got darkness in me. I've got problems, and I don't know.
I like to tell people, because there's a guard that goes up if someone does find out that I'm a Christian.
Yeah, which
is the result of years of trauma. So it makes me sad, first of all, because that guard that goes up is there for a reason, and it's not something I'm proud of that Christianity has done in our culture. But when people find out I'm a Christian, I like to say, I'm a Christian, but I'm the kind that is the sick that needs the doctor kind of Christian. I'm the sick person who needs to be in a hospital, and that's why I need Jesus. And the guards go down a little bit when I'm kind of saying like it's because I've acknowledged that I just need help, and I need more help than my friends. And I think so if I was going to go back to the very, very root and teach Sunday school to my kid, I've tried to look at, first of all, the New Testament instead of the Old Testament, but also turn these into who should your heart be going out to look to help. Not how good are you by obeying your parents, or do you do your chores or not, or do you pray as much as Daniel did? But
right.
Are you starting to see people like Jesus saw people? And that means if someone is hurting, then you try to see that and help them. Or if you see someone who's nervous about going to school, then what can you start to sympathize with that? Can you? And as I'm teaching my son that, I'm trying to learn that myself, because I still have this these hangups about that I'm in and other people are out. But Jesus came to the in group and said, it's I don't care that you're in, you're doing it wrong. And a lot of his ministry was reaching out to the out. And he tried to say this horrible thing. Jesus did not give us a loophole. So first he said you have to love God and love your neighbor. And if that wasn't a word as, egregious, then he specifies the story about the Good Samaritan, where he puts that one person that you just wish was not, like, no, that's my enemy, not my neighbor. So I feel like a good practice for Christians is to tell yourself the Good Samaritan story. You got to be the priest, or you've got to be one of the religious people, and then you cycle through people in your head, and then you stick in that person as the Samaritan that just stabs into your side. So this changes. So for me, I've told the story to myself, and I just hate it when I do this too. It's a very frustrating experience. If you want to meditate but also be frustrated, you tell the Good Samaritan, but then you say, a Church of Christ guy walked by because he was late for Wednesday night. And then, the Baptist was going to the liquor store because that's our joke about Baptist. And then My Pillow guy walked by because he had a shipment of pillows. But then you fill in, but then this person stopped, and For a while, for me, it was, I would fill it in with, then the illegal immigrant stopped and helped the guy. Like, dang it. We're supposed, but they're illegal. They're breaking the law. They're immoral just as existing people. No, of course not. If that's the one that sticks out to you, that's who you stick in the story. Or you say the queer transgender person stopped and helped the guy, and then you're like, dang it, Jesus. Or you say the MAGA buffalo helmet wearing guy stopped. Or you say, then the cop stopped. Or then you say, then the Black Lives Matter activist stopped. And it's what you just plug in whoever that person is that just makes you go like, that's my neighbor?
Yeah.
So that's hard enough. Love God and love your neighbor. And as if he has not already stabbed us in the middle of the heart. Then Jesus says, oh, and then your enemy, you should love your enemy too. So that in the Venn diagram of like, okay, if they're not God, are they your neighbor? Oh, okay, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out. So I do the Good Samaritan story, but put in kind of like the person that rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah.
That's my neighbor. Okay, I've got to love them. Rats. And then it's like, okay, who's left? My enemies.
Yeah.
And God says, love them, and leaves no room for any us versus them. None.
Yeah.
And he's constantly doing this to Israel because that was who needed it then. He's saying, hey, the Gentiles, or, Elijah couldn't find someone righteous enough, so he had to go outside of Israel to find that person because the astrophysicist, atheist, was the person he was looking for.
Yeah.
And Peter needed this when he was really struggling with Paul and what should we do with believers who aren't circumcised. And so Jesus showed him Cornelius, this clearly moral, upstanding relationship with God guy who was zero amount Jewish.
Right. And he was a military guy too.
And he was a Roman. Yeah, he was the
Roman centurion.
Yeah, that's not me saying like my enemy is the Democrat that is AOC. AOC maybe could be the Samaritan for some people.
Yeah.
Or maybe Rush Limbaugh could be the Good Samaritan for some people.
Right.
But then he was like, he went to communist China and found Cornelius.
Right.
And we're like, no, you're not saying that it goes, that they're also not us versus them? Like, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, have you seen that? There's a version of the multiple versions of this cartoon floating around the interwebs where it shows people like Jesus talking. It's like an old painting of Jesus talking to people, like at the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And he goes, love everyone. And somebody in the crowd screams, like, what about Gary? And he's like, yes, even Gary. And then like Gary speaks up, he goes, suck it, everybody else.
Yeah.
And he's like, Gary, you're not helping. Or the version that's like, love everybody, and somebody like, even the transgender person, or even the Muslim, or fill in the blank. And Jesus says, did I stutter? It's because if you ask God, who am I not supposed to love? You're not going to get an answer.
Right. It's frustrating because I want a nemesis to hate and to fight and to be better than. And Jesus keeps taking them away from me, and it's frustrating.
Spoiler alert. The enemy is you.
No. Yeah. I'm supposed to look at my own planks?
Yeah.
I want to take the plank out of my eye and stab other people in the eye with it. That's kind of where I am. But I'm confronting this Jesus who not only did he heal the guy's ear that clearly deserved it when one of his disciples, in what was about to be the most glorious moment. Who had the sword? Peter again?
Peter.
Yeah. Finally, Peter gets it right. The Messiah is about to be arrested, and Peter single-handedly, because I'm pretty sure they only had one sword, right? Is that?
I have no idea.
There's a there's a Bible verse that cracks me up when Jesus is like, we probably could use a couple of swords, guys. And they're like, we have this one. And he's like, yeah, that'll do, Peter. Thank you. Great. Peter's the one with the sword, But anyways, finally, the Messiah, they're in Jerusalem, and he's been getting it wrong this whole dang ministry. And then he finally is like the hero of the story.
Almost.
And attacks Rome. And then Jesus is like, no. And he heals him, and then he becomes like kind of the laughing stock,
yeah.
Slumps off to himself and listens to roosters crow for a while until he can come back. So,
yeah, what you're saying earlier about the outsider, the importance of loving an outsider is something that it kind of hit me. I mentioned Joseph Shulam, the Jewish guy, a while back. He's a Jewish Christian in Jerusalem. I was listening to one of his talks one time, and it was entitled "Jesus Was a Pharisee." I was like, "Wait, hold on. Well, you got something wrong."
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But the entire thing was about, made a very good point about how he thinks that looking back at history and what Pharisees were, Jesus was one of the Pharisees. So he was very much the in crowd. He was trained as a rabbi, clearly, because he was teaching other people and they called him rabbi. He knew the scriptures, and the Pharisees were known for, that's one of the big things they were known for, was having a high regard for scripture and knowing things and doing the right thing. And he was saying that that's why the Pharisees were following him around all the time, giving him a hard time, telling him he was messing up, because he was one of them.
Huh.
But Jesus was not about trying to make his in-group happy all the time. He could have gone around and taught the stuff that the Pharisees taught, because he knew it. He was one of them, possibly. But he went to the people who were on the outside, who were the prostitutes and the sinners and the tax collectors. And he didn't, he was perfect in every way we can imagine, but he didn't flaunt that around. He just went and talked to the person who was a leper outside the city, who nobody would talk to, nobody would love.
Yeah.
And when we have this us versus them, like you're talking about, it becomes, I care about my in-group, and I actively don't care about you because you're on the outside. Even if that's a different name on your church building, or a different political party, or you weren't born a girl, what do you think you're doing? That kind of stuff. We do that so quickly, and I have this issue too. Because I'm a human, but the fact is, Jesus was all about loving and taking care of the outsider. Seems to be more than the insider, because I think the insiders they're okay. They can they're okay.
Yeah.
But it's the person who's on the fringe, who's on the outside, who the rest of the world thinks is dirt and unlovable. That's who we need to focus on loving, not love passively, like the Good Samaritan, the people walking by. I'm sure I'm going to say prayer, thoughts and prayers for you. But it's somebody who's loving actively and doing something purposely to change that person's life. And if I can continue on my soapbox for a second, it's not just get them into heaven, Jesus was all about taking care of people who were sick, people who couldn't eat. And then he talked to them about spiritual things. And that's what his focus was. And our focus needs to be, as Christians, I think, finding that outsider, finding the fringe person, and just loving them where they are and helping them with life. And then you can get into this other stuff later.
Yeah. I think it's so useful for Christians to try to see that perspective. It's hard after 2,000 years of of culture bleeding in and tradition and everything, but the Pharisees were the good guys. If you could draw an analogy to an analog to how does the culture see Christians today, it'd be similar to how Gentiles or non-Pharisees saw the Pharisees, that they had it figured out, but also that they felt, I would have felt lower than a Pharisee. I would have maybe seen some hypocrisy in the Pharisees, but for the most part, they weren't evil. They were trying to do it right. And there's another thing to learn, in that Jesus went from there, but said, that it's not the whole thing, and he showed it with his life. But then there was this reaction from the Pharisees that I think is really telling, because the reason Jesus was killed was not because he loved people, it's because he was upsetting this idea that the Pharisees had of themselves. And I think as Christians, it's more healthy for us to read ourselves as the Pharisees in the story to try to get what Jesus is telling us today. So as Christians, we're going to have this reaction to people who maybe are outside. Maybe it's because they're in another denomination, but maybe it's because they're completely outside. If we're thinking of Pharisees, we're gonna either feel better than those people, or we're gonna have some kind of an anger gut reaction towards those people. The people who, maybe even worse, that are maybe who are part of our church and then leave that church. Leaving a church is a really loaded phrase.
Yeah.
But there's all of this emotion that happens in that interaction. So as Christians trying to read into the Pharisees, if we're if we're worried about someone being lost, then they shouldn't be our enemy. They should be like Jesus says, the sheep that went astray that is worth chasing after.
Yeah.
And I think there's a sad thing that happens, in the church that I grew up in, when, let's say, like, leaders of the church, their kids stay in town but go to other churches. I think there's some shame around that, or some embarrassment. But these are kids who are still following and seeking Christ. But then when there's the other feeling that'll happen, because this is certainly, I've seen this with my family, when if you're not moving out of town, if you move out of town and you go to a church, you get a cake and a signed songbook. But if you're one of those people who's experienced leaving a church for some different reason, it's almost like going through a divorce, only you don't get to call it that,
Yeah.
And so if you're there in the church as the insider, I think there's this, you either want to feel anger or hurt or frustration or judgment. Either that person is lost, or if they're not lost, they must be judging me for going for greener pastures,
Mm-hmm.
And it's so sad that emotion is happening. But then if you're the one that's leaving, I think it's a good thing to work through and acknowledge, why am I feeling all these things? And yeah, I just think that the us versus them thing makes us dig trenches and solidify our barracks. But I think that if we can break down those walls, and we're going to be safe. God is the person who protects us, and we're going to be okay having friends that are not Christians, being in fellowship with Christians who don't see eye to eye on every topic. And even, when, Jesus' disciples were this group that could not have been more different or disagreed more. And then the people who Jesus spent time helping were that same thing. And I think we're a little bit afraid to let go of us versus them and start seeing people like God sees them, which is neighbors or enemies that we're supposed to love,
Even G.O.D.
Even G.O.D. Oh man, G.O.D, I hope he's okay. I hope.
Yeah, Megan and Jody, if you guys are out there, Nathan is sorry.
I'm so sorry. I will. You're both allowed in the club. You don't have to be Christians. I'm sorry, Jody, you're in. I was the bad guy. I was the Sith. I was the poacher.
Twist ending.
Yeah, all along. It was double agent.
I want to wrap it up?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See you later.
See ya. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
I had been screaming.
We're really glad you joined us for our discussion today. For show notes and contact info, please go to followingthefire.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'd also really appreciate you giving us a review wherever you happen to get your podcasts. And special thanks to Daniel Wheat for our music. You can find more of his stuff on Spotify and Apple Music. See you later.
But even on my heart can't compare with what you're worth.